Good evening, and thank you for the induction. As said, I'm Rachel, and I have been working in safety for about 20 years. Um, One of my favourite topics is safety management and how important it is, not only for ensuring safety for you, me, and our colleagues, but how a good safety management system will ensure their welfare and help your organisation better achieve the aim. But today we're talking about governance, which is a close relation of management. So, why is governance important? The short definition of this is that governance is about deciding the scope or the framework of what you want to achieve, and governing is making sure that you actually achieve it. For me, I'm going to use a whole lot of examples that come from the safety world. And when it comes to governance, it's about answering that question about what is reasonable control and ensuring that we make the ends meet and get there in the end. That governance is ensuring that the right thing is happening, not just what we think is easy to manage. This all came about from my experience back in 2010. I had just started working as the HSEQ manager at Grampian Fire and Rescue Service, and this was the year that the HSE published Striking the Balance Between Operational and Health and Safety Duties in the Fire and Rescue Service. For those of you who might not have heard it, it was about balancing how to be a hero with health and safety management designs. I'd been working in safety for about 5 years then, and the fire service had taken an opportunity at that point in time, because of this document coming out from the HSE, to put health and safety in the signs of a support member of staff rather than an operational fire and rescue person. And my role was to establish a proactive HSEQ system. At this point in time, I was only peripherally aware that this was a decision made by a fire board. I wasn't really aware how it would affect my day-to-day role. And going back to this is why my role had come into it. So what we had to do was decide on how to implement the HSE document, which was about making sure that everybody came home safely, not just the person they were trying to save. In principle, everybody agrees that makes sense, but they also agree that they expect the emergency services, police officers or firefighters to enter dangerous situations to save people. And making sure that we strike that balance, we need a framework that will allow the firefighter to act when the circumstances make it necessary to risk their lives to save others, but to limit when that is necessary. They will always be heroes, but we need to know what a senior officer can ask them to do as part of their work, because you can't say, you need to be a hero, mate. So what does this have to do with governance? The simple answer to that is, you are not required to be able to swim to join any fire and rescue service. You need to be capable of doing the manual handling, have endurance, there's other fitness requirements, but not the ability to swim. However, with the changes to our environment, as you might have noticed over the last few days, we are dealing with many more floods and other water-based instances, and that type of rescue has become part of the fire and rescue job description, but they are still not required to swim. Left to a firefighter, they will at least run towards the burning building, if not straight into it. And of course, if they're put in the same situation for a flood or other dangers regarding water, they're still going to go and risk themselves. But this isn't the best idea that they have. If we are just managing them, we will ensure that they are either never put into this position, or they may need where they may need to jump into the water, or provide them with sufficient information, instruction, training and supervision to lower the risk as far as possible. But then we get stuck on the problem with what is sufficient information and instruction. Firefighters have the biggest number of skills that are needed. They need to be able to take apart a car, put out a fire, etc. If you look at people who can rescue people from water, say a lifeguard, they spend a good portion of their day doing the training to make sure they do this. We can't possibly ensure that firefighters do the sort of training that would meet the same sort of competence as a lifeguard. Governance starts at the point where we've agreed that they need to rescue people from water, but they will then explain, what does that actually mean? When will the fire rescue service be called to deal with water? Currently, it's for inland water rescue, when the Coast Guard deal with sea rescues. And then it is, what does that rescue look like? For example, the fire and rescue service do not rescue animals that are struggling in the water, because on the whole, animals can swim and it is not a good resource in place. Governance is not about deciding on what a organization is doing, but a governance system provides the details of the what they are actually going to do, to ensure aspirational objectives can be turned into realistic aims based on the specific needs of that organization. The needs of Grampian, the fire service that I worked for, which was in the north of Scotland, is different from the fire and rescue service that services the West Midlands, which is a region in centre of England. One covers a huge area of arable land and has coasts and mountains, and the other one is mostly covered with dense populations such as Birmingham and Wolverhampton. Based on the history and the needs of these areas, their fire boards can decide what they need to put into their resources to make sure they're keeping their people safe, while meeting the aspirational terms of the fire and rescue service will be available to rescue people in need. It also means that the fire service can set the right key performances for their actual management teams. Sorry, managed to push up a slide instead of check something else. It's these key performance measures that change it from just management to governance. It makes sure that people are actually measuring the progress is made for their specific targets rather than just a general target. So, what's the difference between this and a management system? Why have a separate setup for just governance? For me, there's two very important reasons. One, as I've said before, it's defining that scope of what needs to be done. In the example I've given you, I do believe firefighters are hero. Not a single one of them will hesitate to put their lives in danger to save somebody else, but it shouldn't ever be a numbers game. It shouldn't be their lives mine. So the resources have to be allocated to ensure that we are getting the right outcome, which is everybody, not just the person at risk, but everybody goes home safely. Through the governance, we can have this unbiased review about how to perform the water rescues. Somebody isn't going, I can do it, so everybody else should be doing it. They can take the personalities out of this to make sure that they have the right systems in place. The firefighter and their officer will always be swayed by the incident immediately in front of them. By having a governance team who will look at the debrief and provide the information of what they need to do, we can train people to deal with these situations and support them after the situation. And this brings me on to the second point of why success is so important, of why governance is so important, and that is to ensure that success is meaningful. Have you ever heard the quip that the surgery was a success but the patient died? This is when your KPIs, your performance measures, are concentrating on the wrong thing. We need to make sure that the aspirational objective, which is every surgery comes out with everybody being better, has realistic setups. It's not to say that We don't need to look at different ways of managing things, but the governance should ensure that we aren't just doing meeting one KPI, which means our objectives aren't being missed. It is about governance is ensuring that managers have both sufficient performance measures and they are monitored in a holistic manner that does not become only a measure of the consequences of whether that criteria is being met or missed. For example, if we are only concerned about profit because that affects the bonus that people receive, we need to make sure that the profit is meets the requirements of that organization, of whatever that profit is. I'm not going to attempt the Latin on this slide because my mother says my pronunciation is terrible. But what it means is who watches the watchman. It is a very old saying, which means that everybody needs some form of oversight, and that is how I'd like to sum up why governance needs to be separated from management. If there is a robust government system, it answers the question for who is making sure that the management system is being watched. For this, I'm going to give you a quick rundown of my current setup at UCL. I am one of 4 heads that leads a team of about 20 safety advisors that we cover all aspects of strategic safety at UCL. I report to a director of safety who reports to executive director who then reports to the University Management Committee. That is the management system. The governance system is different and has other people involved. In those cases, I report to specific biological and chemical subcommittees who are overseen by the Workplace Health and Safety Committee. And then the final governance change is the UCL Council, which is again separate from the University Management Committee. Although I've worked in organisations where it's never quite this complicated before, I've been an HSCQ manager with or without a team, and there's only been one level of governance for example, just the Health and Safety Committee, or I have been the health and safety person who's been embedded in a contract with the governance coming from of that contract from a strategic or a home office, which is sometimes not in the same city and sometimes not even in a different country. There is that separation of the people who are managing me on making sure my projects meet those requirements and those people who are checking that the system of the health and safety system is actually doing what we need them to do, which is ensuring people's safety. For example, the system only works if each group understands where their role is in the framework. If the governance team starts to concentrate on my key performance measures rather than the objectives, it can lead to those patients dying because the surgery will be a success, but we're not making sure that it has a meaningful success. In health and safety, that would be, please lower the number of near-miss reportings we're getting. That's easily enough done. But if the number is being lowered because people just aren't reporting, that's not going to improve safety. And then the management structure is important because if the managers aren't actually checking that I am meeting those targets, I can say safety is improving because we've had no RIDDORs. Not that the fact that we're still increasing the huge number of people who are having minor accidents, because we haven't had a major incident, it looks like we're improving the safety. One is management trying to do a governance role, and one is governance doing a management role. If management wants to govern, the objectives will be there, but they will not be reached because without the management providing that roadmap, there's insufficient guidance and supervision at the operational level. This has the additional problem that it often needs to disenfranchised workforce because there will be unrealistic deadlines and a feeling that nobody understands what it takes to get things done. If you're given a optimistic objective such as bring RIDDORs down to 0, it doesn't explain that all the other factors and why that is not a suitable KPI. So that is where we come from, the difference of governance and management in my world. So if we look at it on a more summarized basis, governance is about setting those strategic tasks and setting the organization goals. Management, day-to-day operations. So in the case of the safety committee, they will set and monitor the performance measures about the completion of projects, but management will decide on how many resources, how long it should take, and provide the information that's going forward. They will set up the accountability frameworks to ensure that I do have those reportings, that I don't just go, safety is being done in these inspections are fine. They will make sure that the framework looks at the bigger picture. Management, as I said, is about the allocation of resources. It is the what, the organisation priorities, that governance helps, and it's the how that management goes. For the very simplest example of how we do that, governance is the government, management is the civil service, and in my case, it is the Workplace Health and Safety Committee and line managers and the operations team. So, to finish on this early stage of why governance is so important, it is how you'd get through the forest. You need people who are looking out and will deal with the problems that are in front of you, both the expected ones, such as the trees, and the unexpected ones of, say, the rabbits or even wild pigs. But if they are dealing with what's immediately in front of them, they cannot be holding that map to make sure you get to the destination. That is being held by governance. They do not even have to be in the wood with you, as long as they have that oversight of what you're doing. So they can keep you either onto the known path because it's working, or guide you through a diversion that prevents you from going off the cliff. So, examples of governance in the media. The first example I'll give you is Enron. This was in 2001, while ago, but this is an example of how an objective was achieved, but with no governance, it didn't look at the bigger picture, so it ended up being illegal. In case you're unaware, Enron had a market capitalization of 70 billion at the beginning of 2001. By November, it was bankrupt. This was due to their senior executives choosing the wrong way to consider the value of their securities. You can look up the case, and I won't go into details about it, but nobody checked to see if what they were doing was legal, and it ended up completely illegal. So another one that you might have heard about is the mission governance from Volkswagen. And this is, Volkswagen want to produce cars that meet the requirements of their set of clients and to broaden that range going forward. However, in 2015, they installed software devices into their diesel cars that was purposely just so they could meet a specific US requirement. It wasn't looking at the general thing, is this car for going ahead? That concentrated on one criteria, that they will get a pass from this regulatory authority, rather than looking at the end point of, will this car sell and be what our customers want? Again, with better governance, it might not have occurred. Another example, which I didn't have time to put on the slide, has just been apparent in the UK media, in the fact that the court case has ruled that the current government's 2050 carbon emissions deadlines are not legal because there's no management behind them. In the case of this one, it's all about the governance. We have this aspirational goal, but without having the management behind it to go, how are we going to achieve that? And how do we bring everybody else along? It doesn't make for good governance. Which brings me on to good governance. It doesn't really make the paper. I was looking for examples to show you. What I will tell you is there is a company called Grant Thornton who has reported a corporate governance review for the last 19 years. And they still point out the majority of firms are not joining up the dots between governance to create a sustainable value. Although they can prove that the best performing companies are embracing these governance activities, that it's not just due to compliance, but it is considered a business essential and is fundamentally linked to their strategy and how rewards are made. Okay, so that's enough about why I think governance is important. I'm going to talk you through governance systems, how you can grow your system, how to recognize them, and methods that I've used to look at governance and to move it along forwards. There are lots of models that you can use from this. The one I'm going to talk you through is the one that's most closely aligned to safety governance. Which starts off with transactional, goes on to a compliance stage, and then focused and proactive until we get to the final point of integrated. So I'm going to give you a brief view of each to show you how an organization can mature their governance system. So, transactional. For safety, this is when we're seen but not heard. We are definitely meeting everything. We've got the safety person, but we're not heard unless it's needed. There's no reports, there's no committees, but if there is an incident, safety's job to clear it up and make it go away. At this stage, it's all about ensuring that there's an emergency plan if something goes wrong. But we find that in most cases at this point, leaders don't actually believe it can go wrong. Or if they do believe it's going wrong, they believe that it's going to be something that you can't prevent in the first place, that you can't stop people injuring themselves, so you might as well have a first aid kit. Thankfully, in safety, we are rarely at this stage anymore because we have the backing of the HSE, etc. But this doesn't mean that it's universal, because the whole thing about management and governance is it's not just one topic in safety. It should be for the entire management system of your organization. In safety terms, to get past this stage, I basically go to managers and go, so you're doing this. If we do it in this way and we do a bit more proactive, you can meet this objective at the same time. And it's about showing them how their needs can be met by having a system that combines these things, and they can meet different legal requirements at the same time. Quite often in health and safety, we combine in the environment needs, the sustainabilities at the same time, and point out that if we're looking at it more, we can get involved and you don't have to do more than one checklist at a time. The second stage is compliance, and this is where we often start in safety governance. There are rules in place that we must have a competent person, we must have risk assessments, and we must have a safety committee. But once it's in place, the problem with compliance is it tends to be put onto the shoulders of that competent person to make all those decisions, that it's just a matter of being compliant with everything going on, and it is the health and safety manager to do all the work. And because of that, this is the stage where management and governance is least separated. The leaders are not focused on something, and they're not sometimes even looking at the outputs. They're just going, well, if somebody in health and safety says it's necessary, we'll just do it. They let somebody get on with their safety and leave them to it. They don't get involved. I find this is quite often the system that is the hardest to grow past. And this is where I find that peer-to-peer support meetings like this are the most helpful. My go-to explanation is compliance with a car is it needs an MOT, it needs to be insured, and it's taxed. So where does the maintenance come into it? And this is the point that we explain that the maintenance helps you prevent the breakdowns and even make sure that you don't hit compliance problems with charges of dangerous driving because your chassis or something else isn't working, that the maintenance is in place. By introducing your leaders to other peers who have had these problems, and I keep on slipping the slides, they can bring up examples where they show that this narrow understanding of what compliance is shows that they're not truly ensuring they're managing their legal obligations, which is when we move on to focused. Now they have specific examples, people will then take the steps to ensure that they don't fall over the same trips as have been experienced to others. For example, a current example of this is the focusing on managing the risk of cladding on multi-storey buildings. Nobody wants the risk of another fire like Grenfell. However, that is a single point where, if you look at the information that came out of Grenfell, there were many other points that we can take proactive measures to make sure that it doesn't happen again, but people are focusing on just one. This stage and the next go hand in hand, so I'm not going to explain how to deal with them now. I'll go straight on to the next slide. The next stage is proactive. This is when people are involved and interested and requesting that information. But if we don't make sure that we clarify the difference at this between governance and management, this is when they will fall back into focused. The leaders are now involved and they want to make a difference, but if they get too caught up in individual projects, they end up falling back into a management role and being focused rather than taking on a governance role to looking to see how those projects can fit into the bigger picture to make sure the organization is going in the right direction. If you get past that, you get to integrate it. This is when you show people that we are making sure that all those activities, projects and tasks are being developed and reviewed by a governance to make sure that we're heading the right direction. It is where governance can ask the right question and get the right answers. So to get from focused and proactive to integrated, it is showing them what sort of reports they need to get. It is asking them to go, how does this fit into it? How do we make sure that we have a long system, a process will make sure that this will not happen again, rather than how does we finish on this project? Management, when we get to the integrated system, does not need to be told that something is going to be monitored and then they ask how. It is going to, they will be making sure that that monitors is in place, and the governance will make sure it fits into those long-term objectives at all points, that they have the checkups that what we were doing last year still fits into what we need to do. I think hopefully the system will now run like clockwork. Okay, so I've just gone through a growth model and I've gone, we can go from just the transactional all the way into an integrated system, and it's easy. Just talk to your leaders and it will happen. And of course, it's not this simple. I had two major problems which I still stumble over. One is self-regulation. At the very beginning, I did question the same way as you might too. Why do I have to spend so long writing reports? It's almost exactly the same information that I send to my manager, that I send to this committee, that I send to that committee. Can't it be summarized and we just add on to it, do a rolling report? But in that case, it doesn't provide the information about how the parts fit together. For example, the simple correlation is between the fact that I've completed a proactive safety program to increase the number of near misses is one report, and a different one is the fact that we've had that drop in riddle reports. We need to show that that is related. So when I put in another report that I need an increase in budget and resources to run other proactive safety campaigns, why this is in a good place. Each of my management reports will show that the campaign's been successful, that we've got a low number of RIDDORs, but by having a governance report that puts all that information together, we can better achieve the objective, which in that organisation was safe today, safe tomorrow, and safe forever. Another mistake that I have made, and I've hopefully gone over, is not understanding the difference of solving the project and saying that's done, and looking at the long-term processes. If I'm in many cases, such as risk assessment, for example, I would spend a lot of time making sure everybody's risk assessments were in place. Everything was done, project was finished, it was completed. But then 3 years later, I'll find out it was in the same system as it was before, because there is nobody checking that they are still keeping that risk assessments in place. If a governance system requires the risk assessments must be valid and then expects people to report back on the number of active risk assessments and the number valid, this will ensure that the priority of keeping those risk assessments in date stays with that operational team and can be managed. If we don't put into the governance, it will always drop off people's priorities list. And because if you do not have it being reported on, it will always be the last thing that people do. And you will end up back in the focus stage, making sure that the holes are covered rather than building that proactive system. Okay, so in summary, yes, governance and management do go hand in hand, and leaders are required to do both. Governance provide the detail, the roadmap, and management will ensure how is in place. For example, if we're talking about a roadmap, they will choose which car, the competent time, and the leaving time. But governance will make sure that we've actually achieved the objective, that we've arrived where we need to on time and with everything that we need. Having a governance system ensures that an organisation are more likely to achieve their full objectives rather than only parts of it. When it's been separated from management but fully integrated in the organisation, this is how it works, but it will take time. Okay, that's a very brief overview, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you, Rachel. That was really comprehensive and very interesting. We've got one question so far, which I think is in two parts. So I'll read it all out and then I can repeat it if needs be. If risk management / health and safety become very bureaucratic or committed in quotes, can the governance and management work side by side and reach their goals if they are the same? Governance versus management, do they speak the same language?
Okay, so they should be speaking the same language, but with different objectives. Management, this is where we come to, and that is actually the job of governance, to ensure that the objective is fully understood and it doesn't get bogged down in management of what's happening. An example I will give is about PPE. Now, the management belief was completely right that everybody should have the right PPE, and departments would be rated on their safety compliance as on how much people were meeting that PPE requirement. That was the objectives that the people wore. They weren't making it because management saw that as a secondary objective to the cost. So the PPE was not a separate line. So management would provide a basic PPE, in this case a shoe, at the cheapest possible price that didn't fit everybody, but it was provided. And then of course we had problems with compliance. The shoe didn't fit, it wasn't comfortable, it wasn't suitable for all the people, etc. But because the two objectives, management went, we're meeting them, we've provided the PPE, we've kept our costs really, really low. What happened with governance is, but you're not meeting the third of them actually wearing the PPE. And then the governance went, well, we need to look out into that. You've done everything we've asked. How can we help? And they did two simple things, which is take the PPE out of their general cost line and put it into a different cost line, and then provide training to make sure that people were then aware and had consequences if they did have the right PPE about not wearing it. So it is partly making sure, governance is making sure that management do understand what language you're speaking, that you don't have different terminology, and the fact that when you're reporting, you are meeting the objectives fully in accordance to what the governance team want. They want everybody to get home safely and make profit, but one has to give slightly to make sure that the other happens. I don't know if that actually answers your question or if we've got a follow-up.
Not had anything through yet. That was a very good example, actually, very topical too, without getting political. Has anyone else got any questions for Rachel whilst we have her here? We'll give it a couple of minutes. People are sometimes shy in putting questions through. We don't seem to have any more. Maybe we could finish off with the top 5 tips.
The top 5 tips is, yes, when they said earlier that there is the fear of it being bureaucratic, accept that paperwork does need to be done. Governance is about proving that what you wanted done was actually done. So it does sometimes involve doing different reports, but you need to make sure that people understand that it's not the same reports. So be clear that there are paperwork, but make sure that those reports are meaningful, that you aren't just reporting the same information over and over again, that you are clear. This is a management report to say this is going ahead, and this is a report that these milestones to get us somewhere of these projects are being finished are being done, so people can buy into why you need to do 2 different reports. The second, I'm not sure if I've got 5, but the second big point is don't be afraid to question. If somebody is going on about governance and going, we need to do this, we really need to do that, management should feel empowered or should have some system of going, we can't. We like the idea, this is a great idea, but at this point in time, if we are also doing great ideas 1 to 3, we don't have the current capacity for doing this. Can you look at it in a different way to make sure it's happening? For example, firefighters can't swim. We are never going to have enough time to teach every firefighter to swim, but they can look at what we're going to do for that, providing assistance in water dangers that doesn't involve people swimming.
Great, thank you. We've had more questions in, so always ask a question and then somebody follows. So we have a question here from Andrew. So should governance teams be training management or the health and safety team?
In my world, it is a matter of coaching upwards in health and safety. We are rarely on the boards, but as a specialist, I should be showing my managers what sort of reports will be most helpful, and to explaining things like riddle reports to governance aren't helpful. ever since we have been doing tenders and people ask, how many RIDDOR reports did you have? And going, well, we won't do this tender because we've got one RIDDOR report. You need to explain to your governance team about explaining why you have a good management team, and that one RIDDOR report for 3 years was a circumstance that cannot happen again, is more important to get that work to show what's going on. So there is a bit of knowing your specialism to help people come up with the right reports, but then it's making sure your organization is aware of what's going on and pointing them in the direction of their peers and going, I might not be able to train you. Ask other people in your situation what is suitable training. I actually have some leadership training, but as much as I'm going on about governance and management purely by safety, governance is a much bigger world with the finance and equality, etc. So there are more general training out there.
Thank you for that. And then the next question, what methods would you utilize to engage/motivate senior management into implementing an appropriate government system for health and safety?
I would use the example, and I start off with this principle: don't you want to move things on rather than dealing with the number of toilets that are out? Management, if you point out, will deal with that. Somebody will tell you, we've got a management system in place. The contractors are coming in this day, and it will just take 12 weeks to sort out. As governance, you want to know why that wasn't in place. Why did our contractors fail us in the first place? And if you can do that and sort out those governance, it's not just the toilets you won't have to hear about it, but it's our window cleaning, our salting, and all of the rest. And if we can do that, you can see how it's a much better use of your time. You have employed very good managers to sort out those details. But what we want to do is the ability to make sure our contractors meet our needs, so we're not firefighting, we're being proactive.
Great.
How is everything?
Sorry, I'm mute. If management is about operations and governance about strategy, why did your example state that management was about providing one, it says shoe, I think it meant show. This would not have met the operational requirements. The strategy of providing PPE would have been met even although it was operationally insufficient.
The operations had decided that to meet their different criteria, which is to keep costs down and to provide the PPE, they wouldn't look at the individual needs, which meant that they kept on failing on the criteria of people wearing the PPE. So they were trying to meet their criteria, and they were thinking 2 out of 3, and knowing that the money was one of the more important criteria, was where they needed to be. Governance provided the direction that they needed to meet all 3 criteria, but understood that the fact that the way that it was set up, that management couldn't. By giving them more leeway about how to manage their money and looking at all 3 criteria together, it meant that they could meet all 3 criteria, and going forward they could see how much this PPE cost was important. What I didn't mention in my example, it was, although for 1 quarter when PPE was redone, the costs went up, over the next 3 years, the PPE costs actually went down because people weren't always claiming that they lost their PPE, that they needed new ones for different reasons. So by looking at the 3 criteria in a more integrated manner, it helps their management to meet all 3 of them by changing the governance and providing that steer to the managers. Does that make more sense?
I've just had a comment through say thank you. I understand your fuller explanation. Now, I'm
Sure.
hoping you can remember which was your first question because I've got a follow-up. But if you can't, it's my apologies because I close them off as you answer them. If let's have a look. It's this one. Let's have a look. Should organisations have 2 groups as standard? Most public bodies have 2 groups, but due to financial constraints, example, 1 refuse collector and 12 managers of all disciplines saying that they should do what they should do when people are only concerned about getting the bin lifted. I don't think people value the behind the scenes work to ensure bins are being uplifted every Wednesday. We need to promote governance and health and safety professionals as a valued resource.
Yes, I fully understand the issue, but not all organisations can have a setup like the fire service and a fire board or UCL and their governing board compared with their governing committee. But what you can do is set up the meetings in such a way that you don't allow them to talk about toilets at the governance meeting. And this is where the need to provide different reports and different information in going ahead. For health and safety professionals, this is where you have to be very clear about what your safety committee is about and about it not being managing you. In most cases, in most of my life, I've been expected to chair the Health and Safety Committee because it's safety. Who better than the Health and Safety Manager to chair the committee? And each case, that is one of the first things I look at and go, no, the point of the Health Safety Committee is to question me about why my year plan or my 5-year plan have these things in place. And when they go, but what about this particular incident? We have to go, no, this is where the agenda is. It is about proactive matters. If we need to have a debrief about a particular accident, that is to be taken in a different manner and should be managed. If we're looking about why we're having a series of incidents, that is for something for safety committee and that governance, and being very clear about what we're doing. It's not necessarily having a complete governance board, but making sure that what you have in place understands their role, so you don't end up just explaining how you're managing your department in health and safety to a different group of people. You have to get them involved in the fact that they are there to question you, not just to listen to you.
Thank you. We've got 4 more questions. So I've never seen so many questions, obviously a very popular topic. So this one is, as a HSE specialist, how can I improve myself to advise the HSE governance team when they are not aligned with the HSE management?
Consider what you want, and consider why they're not assisting in what you need to do. And talk to other health and safety professionals. But it's looking at what are your objectives, what support do you need, and then work on, unfortunately, it's those soft skills such as coaching and report writing that's most important. You need to explain to people how this different information can go forward. One place I went to and saw that the reports they were getting, they didn't provide graphs at all, and they were expected to understand the tables. And so my first step in explaining about governance was to provide them in an information so they could go, but why are we doing this? So they could start to realize there are questions that they needed to answer rather than trying to bamboozle them. I'm not sure if that's a helpful answer if the person wants to have a follow-up.
You've got some tough ones here. Let's go on to the next one. Probably won't be taking any more now. So the next one is, am I right in thinking you can find leadership in both management and governance?
Yes, you need leaders for doing both, and the reality is some of your leaders will be both on your governance team and your management team, especially at the senior leadership level. Depending on where health and safety fits, you might be reporting directly to your CEO, or in my case, the provost, and they will also be part of the governance. But in both cases, they need to be understanding that their role is, one, is to manage you, to make sure you turn up on time, to make sure you meet your projects, that you meet equality and diversity, and the other is to provide that guidance of what that roadmap is. Are the projects you are putting your resources to going to achieve the goals that you need to.
Great, thank you. This one from Norbert. What course would you suggest for learning more about governance and its relationship with health and safety? Great presentation, hence why the questions.
Um, I honestly don't know of a particular course. I'm sorry, I can't help in that way. As I said, in my early days, I was really lucky that I worked for organizations that had very clear governance, so I could see how they were working apart. What I would look for is courses that were run by management people that explain how to be a strategic manager compared with being a day-to-day manager, and look at those things to do with leadership. But they're never quite just purely on governance, unfortunately.
Thank you. These two are quite big questions, so I'm not sure we have the time for them this evening, but let me see if we can, what we can do for these two. So this one is from Patrick. This is probably a large answer. What would management do? What could management do differently to satisfy governance requirements in delivering the set goals? That's quite a big one.
This is where it is understanding, and it's mostly communicate. They don't need to do anything. Governance have to be clear on what they want. So if governance are going to say, yes, we definitely insist that health and safety is our number one priority, but they only ask people or give the rewards based on the profits, then governance aren't going to support management. Management are still going to produce the reports that show that they're making profit. So the question isn't what management should be doing different. They should be either asking governance what they really want, or governance should be doing something different.
Great, thank you. And I think this one's kind of intertwined with the last question. So the final question, how do we enhance the perceptions of senior management so they are more health and safety focused than cost?
This is always a hard thing, because health and safety is something that doesn't immediately make profit. And it is working with your HR business partner, because what is provable is companies that have a good health and safety format have a tendency to keep their staff for longer and make their quality better. Because if we can prove that the stress is down, which is down to health and safety, then you have a happier workforce and you are more likely to make your deadlines, which will have an impact in profit. It is explaining that integrate process, that health and safety isn't a bolt on, it is the framework that you can build a better company.
Thank you so much, Rachel. So many questions, so many complex answers, and not very well me reading the questions. So I'd like to thank you for giving up your valuable time this evening. I'm sure by the amount of questions you can see it's a really interesting subject, and one that
I just
captured the, sorry,
Thank you
carry
very
on.
much. No, I was just going to say, I hope I explained it, because as I said, I haven't had training. It is just something I'm learned, and I'm just happy to share it with you. If you disagree, that's fine. But as I said, I think it's a really, really interesting topic. So I'm
And
happy to speak about it.
I think everyone else does too, judging by the interest in it. So I'd like to thank you for this evening, and I'd like to thank the audience for attending. If anyone wants to get in touch with you, or would you be happy to share your presentation? Don't feel obliged to.
Yes. It's fine. It has my notes in, which you will see were badly spelt and with a total lack of grammar in them. But it's because the presentation won't make sense without the notes. You can have it all.
Okay. So just a last few comments. You are a star. Thanks for the beautiful insight on the topic. Thanks, Rachel. Very informative and interesting, and more thank yous all pouring in. So I'd like to thank you again for a great presentation. I'd like to thank everyone for attending. We hope to see you at the next London branch webinar. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you for inviting me, and I hope you have a good evening.
Thank you.